Hi folks, Bob here again, flying solo. Thank you so much for all the views that I've had recently. The last few videos I've done for the Nashville Paranormal Strat and also for this one, which I'm playing again, the Squire Cabronita Cheapy, have been really well viewed, which I'm really thrilled about. I thought I'd come back and do another number today because I happen to have two amps in the room that I think you might be interested in. These two guys here. For seasoned aficionados, you'll have already spotted that they are pretending to be Trainwrecks. So let's talk about Trainwrecks for a second. Trainwrecks were made by a man called Ken Fisher, who's now sadly not with us, and he, along with Alexander Dumble, are probably the two most fated and famous and celebrated and in demand, sought after, whatever you like, amplifier makers, guitar amplifier makers that the world has ever seen. Dumble is rather better documented, and he made slightly more amps. I think he made about 300, something like that. And he'd only make them to order, and he'd only make them if he liked your playing, which is why he made them mainly for quite celebrity musicians. I played the Dumble once, and I've got, as you might know, I've got three clones, two from Tommy Cougar, Mystic Blues from Sweden, and one from Nick at Kerriatone in Malaysia. All of them are fantastic, all of them slightly different, like Dumble's. Great amps. Trainwreck is the other half of the equation. Ken Fisher made three models of Trainwreck. This is the Trainwreck Express, which I think was his first. It's an amplifier with two EL34 valves in it, so it's a slightly more martially, slight mid-bumped sound. And he was famous for certain things. He was famous for being fanatical about very, very minimal construction inside, very minimal circuits, very clean straight circuit paths. He only used aluminium for the chassis, I think, because he had something about how it didn't alter the sound properly. He was obsessed with how the phase of the signal inverts as it goes through the amp, which I wouldn't claim to know anything about, but he was completely obsessed about it. And his amps now, like Dumble's, now sell for 75, 100,000. More, you know, they've just gone crazy. Trainwrecks sell for about 40,000 because there weren't many of them made, less than Dumble. I think somebody said only about 80. So let's split the difference and call it 100. That's not a lot of amps when you know, you're talking about such a world market hunting after them. So several people make copies and clones, and there are circuits out online. There's a company called Comet that actually had a relationship with Ken Fisher, and probably they're the ones that are actually carrying his legacy most officially. And they're really very good amps. They're quite expensive, they're very good. These two are boutique, hand-built, UK-built clones, built by a gentleman called Marcus Cliff, who is a very distinguished and decorated musician himself. He plays bass for the Manfreds, he played bass in Mark Knopfler's side project, the Notting Hillbillies, and he's a well-known and in-demand session player and recording engineer, and he's a good friend. And he built these two amps for my sadly deceased friend Alan Darby. That's where I came across them. The one nearest me with the wooden housing is mine. Alan very kindly bequeathed it to me in his will. He did know that I was crazy about it, and he listened, which is sweet of him. The other one also belonged to him, and has been put up for sale, and I've just broken its sale to a friend of mine, which I'm really delighted about because it means I keep it in the family without having to splash out the money on it. So I thought I'd just play a bit of each of them and together. Just last thing, because I know you like me to play and get on with it rather than talk and talk and talk. The last thing is just to tell you I've got cheapy Squire Cabronita that I picked up recently, £240 guitar, all in, no mods. Sorry, I modified the volume control with a slightly bigger resistor because it makes it a bit brighter. It's still a bit dark, but it's okay. So, cheap guitar. So, it's not the guitar doing the talking here, it's the amps. And they're going through a box. I'll do a close-up of it. It's an Art Cool Switch Pro, which is an AB switcher box with a ground lift and a phase switch. And it means that I can switch between the two amps or bring both in together. And in fact, I think, yeah, I'm going through one at the moment, so I can just switch between them so you can hear the similarities. I'm going to say similarities because they are the same kind of amp. They are different, but they're definitely peas from a pod. Okay, Now, the fuss about these amps is numerous. First of all, they sound bloody good. They really feel like they're sucking the signal out of the guitar, so they're very chimey and gainy, like a good old AC30. What I think is so clever about these amps is that with most amps, if you dial down on the volume of the guitar, you really lose volume. So you can't really use the volume control on the guitar by itself to take you right from clean to dirty. Something about Trainwrecks means that you get a really nice sort of low volume. So low volume is kind of cleanish and nice and warm. That's this amp, by the way, what I'm going to call number 2. As you raise the volume, you get a bit more density and a bit more compression. Then you're starting to get the edge of breakup, just a little fizz. So great for that kind of West Coast sunshine's always out chimey sound. And then flat out. And this amp isn't dimed. It's in pretty normal mode. That sounds to me almost like, you know, Tom Petty, Heartbreakers, Mike Campbell type sound, you know, a really nice warm American sound. That's amp number 2. If I switch to my amp number 1, now my amp is slightly gainier. The input volume on number 2 here, which sadly is going to leave me in a few days, has got more range on it. Up to about noon, it's kind of clean with a bit of fizz, and then afternoon it starts to get really quite screamy. Mine gets screamy at about 9 o'clock. You've got very little clean headroom in this amp, so you have to really dial it carefully. But both of these amps, unlike Trainwrecks, have got master volumes, so I can actually play these at, you know, reasonably sensible volume. These amps are louder than my talking, but they're not bone-crushingly loud, because they are quite loud amps. They're 40 watts, so they've got some punch. But if I just go... messing around, switching between the 2 amps and just fiddling around with the volume control on the treble pickup with this cheap guitar. And the range of sounds you've got is amazing. So if you imagine putting something really classy like, sorry to be boring, but a really old Telecaster through these things, whoa, wow, wow, right? So if you're the kind of player who is inclined to play with a guitar and a cable and an amp, God, they're fantastic. They're amazing amps. And as I say, the strange thing about them is that they do code quite loud, but that you can also control them. So you could actually record with these. You could certainly gig with these. You wouldn't get into a row with a sound engineer at a gig, unless you really let them rip. And because I'm recording today, I'm on the cheap. I'm recording through a phone. So phone compression, altering the sound a bit. It's not hi-fi. So I'm not going to turn them up really loud. But what else to say about these amps? Yeah. So they've got standard controls. They've got volume control, which is really input gain, treble, middle and bass. They've got a presence control, which is a you know, high end, take off some of the gleam, which I leave about 12 o'clock. They've got a cut control, like a Vox, which takes the top end off, just sweetens the sound a bit at the top end. On number 2, that cut is switchable on the front panel. On my number 1, it isn't. I keep it in the same, almost the same settings all the time. You probably can't see on the video that each of these amps has got green dots marking the optimal setting from one of those clever, it's a pen that you can mark, whether you mark your stomp boxes or your amp settings. It means that you can actually mark in a way, you can wipe it off with your finger or with a little bit of J-cloth. And it means you can mark your amps where your sweet spot settings are, which is really, really useful. And actually, you don't even need to buy a dedicated guitar one. Anything that paints onto a whiteboard, so you can get it in pink and red and yellow and blue and green and any of them, they work. It's really, really useful little thing for just storing your settings. Anyway, pencils aside. So, this This one's got a cut switch, this one hasn't, but they've both got the same controls. But there's a control on the back of these amps, and I've read up about this and I don't really understand electronically what it does. But it's called fast and slow. And I think it alters the amplifier's response as well as its EQ. But it makes the amp much, much more gainy. If I switch to fast on both amps, right, okay. Right, I'm on number 2 again. It's much brighter. Brighter, gainier, probably a little bit shrill. If I take it onto the back pickup, the front pickup. And again, these amps really encourage you to use your volume control on the fly. It's, you know, so for volume players they're great. So that's amp number 1. My amp is going to be really quite hairy on fast because it's got loads of gain already. So again, it's quite screamy. Now bear in mind these amps are turned down, so they're a little bit fizzier than you might expect. If you play them on stage, the fizz would just settle into the sound, into the speaker. They sound really, really sweet, dimed, these amps. Each of them is running through a Celestion Classic Lead 80, which is a speaker I didn't really know much about, but having played around with various different speaker choices I've got, it's a good choice. Really works with the amp. And they're not expensive speakers. I think they're about £100, whereas an Alnico, for example, would cost you £200 and the rest these days. So they're, you know, relatively affordable speakers. Each of the cabinets, they look slightly different. This one used to be a combo, which is why it's got a slot in the top. The speaker baffle goes up to here. This is just now a hole, so it's effectively a front port. The back of the cabinet is closed. This one is actually inside exactly the same, but it's never been a combo, it's a speaker. So it's got a port across the top and a baffle across the bottom, and so they're front ported, closed back speakers, which means you get a certain amount of punch coming out the front. What else to say? Only one other thing to say is I didn't know it until I got this amp back here for a while. In the fast setting, this number 2 amp has also got a bass boost. So it's got bloody switches all over it. And then you've just got standby and on and off. That's it. They're very simple amps. Inside, there's hardly anything to see. There's 3 preamp tubes, 2 power tubes, 2 preamp tubes and a rectifier, and 2 power tubes. A couple of big heavy transformers. So obviously nice, you know, lots of iron inside here, which is making for a good sound. And that's about it. The whole thing about Trainwrecks is they are supposed to be stripped right down. They're the essence of simplicity, but they just sound great. The other thing is, being quite a bright, quite a lively amp, it also works really well with a slightly more ordinary amp. So whether you put it next to say a deluxe reverb, or you put it next to, for example, one of the, you know, Dumble clone type things, which are a bit darker as amps. And again, the combination is fantastic. And in fact, that's the combination that my friend Alan used when he went out and played at Crossroads 2019 in Dallas, where I teched for him on stage. So that was the desired combination: 1 Dumble and 1 Trainwreck, handling everything from the sort of sweet singing mids to these amps. I think the thing I like best about these amps is when you're playing them, they sound a bit like they're just going to kick off and get hysterical. They're quite exciting amps to play, and they're probably the kind of amp where they could get a bit out of control of you if you're not careful. You're probably like, you know, a good old Marshall, you know, 50 watt JTM or something like that. They can get pretty boisterous as well if you dial all the controls. So kind of EL84 type, Marshall-y type, but Voxy, American boutique amp design, cloned by a great British maker. Just thought I'd share it with you. Bit of a pointless video really, apart from it's a bit of fun. This one's going out to its new owner in the next few days. This one ain't going anywhere. This one's staying with me for life. This is an absolute keeper. I would recommend, if you can if you can find one, I mean, ideally, if you can find a real train wreck, if you're in the States, you might even have first-hand, hands-on experience. I don't. But if not, if you can find a comet, or you can find, there are a number of people building these things because they're actually quite simple to build. They're hard to build really well because it's all in the details, but there are some people like Marcus who are actually building beautiful amps. And if you do find one of those clone boutique things, it's not going to cost you a great deal of money. It's not going to be cheap, but it's not going to be Mickey Mouse collector nutty money. So I'd recommend, if you do get the chance, you come across something like this, have a look. They usually look all like this. The wood look and the control layout is derivative of the originals. The originals didn't even have any legends on them. You had to work out what all the knobs did. Didn't have any labels on them. At least these are labelled, so for a simpleton like me, I know where the treble control is. But as I say, once I've got the settings I want, I mark them, and it's a set and forget. You literally plug in, turn up, and play with your volume control, and that's it. So, that's a quick one from me. Once again, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, really appreciate it, really appreciate all your incomings, especially the praising ones, but even the slightly critical ones are useful because I learn something every time. Because, here am I mouthing off, but all the knowledge is out there with you. The shared knowledge is what it's all about. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll find an excuse to come back and see you soon. Probably next time out with Ramon again. But for now, take care. Cheers and happy playing.